In the last video, I explained what Material UI is, and I showed you how to install it and implement a simple example using one of its components, known as the button component. In this video, I'll take it a step further and show you how to create a header with navigation, and also show you the different ways that we can style that component. So let's get started. So as you can remember, in the last example we had the click me button, which was centered here, and on the right I have my project, which had a lot of styling. So what I did was I went ahead and basically deleted most of the files that I don't use, and I kept just the buttons so we can remember what we were doing last week. So what I want to do here, I want to create a header component. And in Material UI, if I was to open Material UI here, and if I was to search for header, there is nothing called header really. So there's no option for that, but I know there is a component called the AppBar. And what the AppBar is, it allows us to do something like this basically. So we could have icons, we could have a search bar, navigation links, anything we want. And so if we look at these examples, you can see that there's different uses. And so knowing that the AppBar is used as a header, I can then come here and create a folder, and I'm going to call it header, and I'm going to create a file inside that. I press A to quickly create a file for me. I'm going to call it index.js. And in here, I'm going to use the React snippets extension to create a component for me. So I'm going to type in RAFCE, and that will create a functional component or a functional React component. And in here, I'm just going to change the name. So I'm going to say header. I know it doesn't match the actual file name, but I like to do things this way sometimes so I can read and understand what component I'm working with. And I like to name it index.js because when I do an import, I don't want to specify the file name. All I need to do is specify the folder name, and by default JavaScript will locate the index.js and look for that import. So header, and I'm going to return something here. And I'm going to go back to my app.js. As you can see, we were using, actually I'm going to increase the size of this. So as you can see, we were using a header element. Okay, increase the size. We were using the header element to basically have our header, but right now we don't need this. So by default, AppBar, when it renders, the element it returns is an actual header. So we don't need this anymore. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to import header from header, pretty much. And I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to render the header component like this. And let's see if that's going to work. And as you can see now, it had rendered the text that we added in here, which means it's working perfectly fine. So now I want to start using the AppBar or the header to make it easier for you. So what I would do is, obviously at the start I would come here and look at the examples and either copy some of the examples, or I would go directly into the AppBar API. So we're going to have a look at both of them. So the AppBar API, it will tell us how to import it, and it will tell us what kind of props we can pass to it, and the CSS that we can use to modify or to change the look of that AppBar. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the examples, and I'm going to import the AppBar here. So I'm going to say import AppBar. Do you know what? I'm actually going to copy this just for simplicity's sake, and I want to cut down on the minutes and seconds of this video. So I'm going to import it. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to put in here AppBar, and at the moment we have an AppBar, but if I was to save it, you'll see nothing because it doesn't have any content inside it, and therefore the height is 0. But I could inspect it for you, and I could show you that it had rendered an actual header element, and that's shown in the DOM, but it's not really shown because the height is 0. And so if you look here where it says div hash root 8 through 3, you can see the 0 is representing the height. So if I was to set the height to 20 pixels, you can see it had actually rendered that element. So let's continue with this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to display a text maybe here. So I could say something like h1, basically header or something like that, but there is a different way we can do that using Material UI. And the reason we use Material UI for that is because we want to have a consistent look across all our websites. By default, all the components that come with Material UI are actually styled in a consistent way. So they all look the same and they're all pre-styled, so we don't have to mess around with them unless we want to change the look of them. So if we were to compare a H1 here and a H1 that comes from Material UI, a H1 that comes from Material UI is styled so that it has the Roboto font and other styles. So we're not going to use this one, but instead we're going to use the typography component that comes from Material UI. And if we can look back here at this example, you can see there is a component called typography. I'm going to copy this component and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to use it under, so I'm going to say typography, and to tell it what you want to display. For example, if you wanted to show a paragraph, a H1 or a H2, there is a component or a prop. There is a prop called variant. So if I was to open up actually typography, and if I was to go to the API, it tells us what kind of variant we can use. So in here it tells us we can use a H1, a H2, a H3, subtitle, and anything you select from here will reflect on the DOM. So I'm going to say variant, and I'm going to say I want this to be a H4 maybe. And I'm going to close it, and in here I'm going to add in a text to show basically on the screen. If I was to go back now, you can see it says dev script. I'm going to refresh this. And if I was to change it maybe to H4 because it's a bit too big, you can see it takes effect straight away, and in the DOM it represents whatever we've asked for. So we asked for a H4, it gave us a H4 with a set of classes and a set of styling. So this is cool. The next thing I want to do is I want to have some kind of a navigation menu. And so there's different approaches to this. You can use links. So there's a links component. Or there's another option called tabs. As you can see here, tabs allows us to separate different content. But also it can be used as a navigation menu. There's an option here, I believe, nav tabs. So it can be used to navigate through different pages. And so the way to use it is to import the tabs component and the tab component. So I'm going to copy both of these, import them here, and under this component I'm going to say tabs, and going to have an opening and closing, and under here I'm going to say tab. So tabs represent the actual container of the mini tabs that we will add. So in here I'm going to say this is B. I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to say B, C, D, and I could just copy paste if I wanted to, but I'll keep that for now. If I was to look back, you can see that it had rendered tabs, but they are empty at the moment. And they don't fit the whole screen. But what we can do, we can either center them or we can add more to fit the screen. I'm going to add maybe 2 more. And save it again. And now we pretty much have it extend to the whole screen. And so I think I made a mistake actually. Yeah, so what we have entered here is not appearing. Basically, we have to go back and look at, we can either look at what the tab component uses as a prop, or we could look at the examples here. And as you can see here, this is a navigation link. Let's look at the another example. So as we can see here, we have tab component, a lot of tab components inside the tabs component or the tabs parent, which is similar to what we did, except that we did the following, which is wrong. So what we need to do is we want to actually close it straight away in this way and do the same thing for all of them. And then in here we can add a prop to set the name. And so I'm going to pretend like I've never done it before, and I'm going to go here and look for tab. So it's giving us the tabs component. I'm going to click on it, and on the bottom there's the API section, and I'm going to go to, maybe I'm going to open up tabs and tab. I'm going to go to the tab component and go through the prop, children, classes, disabled, focus, ripple. So it gives us a lot of options to do various things to these tabs. We can add an icon, a label, a value, and a wrapped. So the value, you can provide your own value, otherwise we fall back to the child position index. And the label is the actual content that will show to the user. So I'm going to place my cursor here, and I'm going to hold down the command option or control on Windows, and I'm going to click here to have multiple cursors. And in here I'm going to say label equals, and then I could edit that separately. And if I was to save that now and go back to our code or our browser, you can see that the tabs are now labeled. Now the cool thing about the tabs and a lot of the components that come with Material UI is that they are responsive by nature. So there's certain props that you can set which allows them to start resizing and have kind of like a chevron or an arrows for us to use to be able to go through them on smaller devices. But for now, we'll keep it like this. We have a header, we have tabs which we can use for navigation. Right now the tabs are not used to navigate, but if we go back to the example, for example, we go back and copy what they have in the nav tabs here. So let's see what they have. So in here, the tabs, they have a handle change, value, full width, and then they have link tab because they're changing the tab, because the tab by default is a button. And so we could set them to do certain things like show different content, but we can't use them to open up a new page. We want them to open up different pages directly without the need to actually pass in a function. So we want to default to a page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy what they have here. So I'm going to create a component here. I'm going to call it link tab, and it's going to receive props. Actually, yes, it's going to be a function that receives one parameter, and it's going to return a new tab for me. And this tab will be used to represent the element. So we could do something like here. We could say component equals A, but then we will have to pass this component to all of these different tabs basically. But right now, if I was to save this, let me just comment this out, and I'm going to save this, and I want to see if this component has changed to a button or to an anchor tag instead of a button. So I'm going to re-render, and I'm going to click here, and as you can see, just by hovering on it, it is now an anchor tag instead of a button. So if I was to click on it, it's going to try and go somewhere else, but it doesn't have any link to go to, so it's not going to really work. Or we could do that to all of them, and then we would have to pass in a link for it to go to. So in here, we've told this tab component that we want you to be an anchor tag. And as we know, anchor tags have a href attribute. So in here I could say href maybe www.google.com. I'm going to save this and see what happens. I'm going to click on it, and as you can see, it had redirected me or pushed the Google link on top of my on top of the website's link, which is not what we want. But that's just showing you, demonstrating to you a way to basically using your anchor tags or your tabs components as navigation. So let's finish this example we started here, because I don't want to be passing in component and href to every single tab. Instead, I want to have a custom component that I can use multiple times, and it does that thing for me. Okay, so let's go back to our example, and I'm going to open up the example they had. And what they have is their function returns a single tab, and that tab is basically overrides the component type of that tab. So it changes so that every time we call the link tab, it returns a component or a tab component with the component as an anchor tag, and then it passes an onClick to it and the rest of the props. So this is how we do it. So we go to component, we say equals anchor tag, onClick. For now, I'm gonna say something like let's see. I'm just gonna copy what they have actually. I'm gonna say and finally I'm gonna pass in the rest of the props. I'm gonna spread them out here so that they become like basically like that, single attributes. And in here I'm going to close this tab component. Okay, what are we missing? Let's see. Okay, that's fine. And we can go ahead and simplify this even more by taking away the rent. So we could do something like this. Get rid of the arrows and just make it cleaner. Okay, it's perfect. So now we have a custom link tab component which has props parameter and returns a tab component where we change in the component type to become an anchor tag, and we have an onClick so that onClick event is automatically assigned to it, and we're spreading out the props. So now we could use this instead of using the other one. So instead of having tab here, I'm going to paste a link tab. I'm going to delete this word, and I'm going to keep the href, and pretty much that's it. And I could do this for all of them as well. So link tab, link tab, link tab, link tab, link tab, and save it. And now if we were to look at the components or the tab components, they're all anchor tags, but they don't have any href attribute to go to. And so we go back and look at the example and how they've implemented that, and you can see they have a label, they have a href, and they have other stuff, other props that they can pass to. So right now we have tabs, we have a text or a header with text. So let's say I wanted one of the tabs to point to a different page. So I would do something like this. Say, for example, about. I'm going to save it, and if I click on B, so something happened here. Our tabs are not leading to different pages, which is weird. Or maybe because, alright, it's because we prevented the tabs from going anywhere. So right now, if I was to click on it, you can see this one took me to google.com. I could also, I think we could do this to link to a different page. So if I was to go back, actually, one second, my bad. If I was to pass in the href and we say about and click on it, you can see it tries to take us to a different page, which is handy both for external links and internal links and pages. So like you see here, you can link to an external link, or you can link to an internal link or page, which is very handy. But be careful of the onClick prevent default. If you want instead to handle the anchor tags using a function, so instead of it having the href and doing something directly without the need to go through a function, you would do this. But if you wanted to go through a function, so the user clicks on a tab and the tab calls a function where it does some calculations and logic before it does something with the link, then you would prevent default, and that's basically to stop the link from activating or doing its normal behavior. So yeah, be careful with that. I'm going to leave this commented out. In fact, I'm going to take it out, and let's see what else can we do. So we could add some maybe icons here as well, or icon buttons, and then we'll get to the styling. The video is already long, so okay. So I'm going to look up for icon, and specifically I'm going to look up for a component called IconButton. And as you can see from the name IconButton, it allows us to use icons as buttons. if we look at the icon button, it tells us what kind of props we can use with it. And if we are to look back at the AppBar, there's all kinds of examples associated with the AppBar. So this is an example of an icon button. It's a button with an icon within it or inside it. So I'm going to open up the source and I'm going to go down to the example. And as you can see here, there's one example. And there's another example here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the icon button, paste it here. I'm going to look for an icon. So I'm going to open up Google and look up for Material UI icons. And let's see, it's the first one. And the link shows us a list of all the icons that come with Material UI. There's a lot of icons, there's different variations, so you can go through it and select what kind of icon you'd like. So I'm going to look for maybe outlined, and I'm going to select just a simple maybe notification icon. Type in the name and click on it and you copy it. But as you can see now, Material UI icons come from a different package. So we no longer can use the core to import the icons. Instead, we have to use Material UI -icons. So if I was to copy this here and paste it and save it, let's see if it's going to crash or yeah. So as you can see here now, it is unable to find the notification icon. And that's because, like as I said earlier, it comes from a different dependency. And so we have to install this package. To install it, I'm going to open up my terminal here. I'm going to open up a second one. If it opens up, I'm going to bring it all the way up so you can see, and I'm going to copy what it says here. So I'm going to copy the name of it, and I'm going to do yarn add Material UI icons. I think it has finished installing. So if we go back to the browser and reload the page, you can see now everything is fine. So now that we have the notification or the icons dependency installed, I could use the icon button. So I'm going to go under here and I'm going to do that. And inside it, I'm going to call the notification icon. So, whoops. And I don't know if you can see anymore. Let's see. So we've installed that and we call the icon inside the icon button. And now we have our actual button. But it is ugly. So we can't use that. No way. So what are we going to do? Okay. So I'm going to actually just do this to go so I can go up. And I'm going to go back and look at the example. There is props that we can pass into the icon button, but we did something wrong here, I believe. I'm going to actually copy this. I don't want it to appear after the tabs. Instead, I want it to appear before the tabs so that it gets almost on the same line as the text. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to save it and see what happens. Okay, the button still looks the same. In general, when dealing with the icon buttons or anything in the header, it is recommended you place it inside the toolbar. And if we look up what toolbar is, it will tell us that it's mainly used to compose or to encapsulate icons or icon buttons that perform different things. So it has a little bit of props that we can use, but really we don't need anything. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a toolbar. Before I do that, I need to import toolbar from material UI core / toolbar, and in here I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to going to do this and go down and basically paste it here. I'm just going to do that to make it a bit cleaner. And we go back and check our button, and as you can see now, our button is looking fine. So it is a button. When you click on it, it ripples, has a ripple effect, which can be turned off. It can be changed in terms of color, things like that. And as we know, a header component or a header elements, they take up the full width. They're block elements, and we can change all of that. So let's get started. I think we've done enough with the AppBar, and I think it's time we can modify the look of this component. So the first way we could do that is using the basic CSS class. So I could create index.css, and in here you could go ahead and target these different components and elements like that. So I could select this, for example, and let's see. So this one has MUI paper color primary. I could select one of its classes. So I could say something like, I would select the MUI AppBar color primary, and I would override the color and the background color that it uses. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to do something like color pink, and background color maybe black. And I'm going to go back to my index, and I could import it here. So I could say index.css and see how that works. So as you can see now, we could change the styling of these components using a simple index.css or CSS file. The only problem with that is the order of the styles that you place inside the index.css is not always guaranteed. So there is some times where it appears at the bottom. So if I was to refresh, you can see now the style is gone completely. If we were to look down, you can see it's gone all the way to the bottom, meaning it's no longer overriding the original colors. So you might think, yes, I could add in the important keywords to allow my changes to always show. But this is not really a solution. This is almost like a hack. And you don't want to be going around setting important everywhere, because this way it will create a lot of bugs for you. You want your code to be done the right way from the start to avoid potential bugs and problems. So we don't want to do this. Instead, there's different ways of doing it. You might also think that we could do something like class name, and we say something like AppBar, And in here we could say, actually we'll get rid of this and we just change the name. We can say AppBar and save it. You think that would work as well, but it is working, but just like the previous example, the AppBar is at the bottom. Now, there is ways from what I can remember to change the order of how these classes are injected in Material UI. But you don't want to do the styling like this either. Instead, what we want to do is you want to create a new file, call it styles.js. And we get rid of the index.css, and let's see, we get rid of the import here. So I got rid of the index.css and I created a styles.js because in Material UI, one of the most popular approaches is writing CSS in JS or in JavaScript. So basically like control or styled components. So there is different functions and helper functionalities that Material UI provides us with to write CSS in JavaScript. So I'm going to open up Material UI styling, and there is the first link here. I'm going to click on it, and in here it gives you all the information you need to style your components, and it gives you a very detailed explanation, which I recommend you go through it. And if we look down here, it tells you we could use the hook API to style. We could use styled component API, or we could use a higher order component, which is called with styles, and also other different ways, and how to target different selectors. So there's all kinds of different ways that we can use to style our components. But what we're interested in is the actual make styles, which is here, which is a hook API. Basically, we import it from the core /styles. We don't need to import or install it. We just need to import it. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to paste it inside the styles.js. And I'm going to close this to make it cleaner. And in here, I'm going to say const use styles. So use styles equals make styles. And what it takes, there's two different versions. There's a version where it takes in an object, and the other one takes in a function, and basically in here it returns a theme, which I can explain at a later stage. But for now, we're going to go with the actual object version. So you pass it in an object, and you pass it in all the classes that you want to have. For example, I wanted to style the AppBar, so I'm going to create a style or a class name called AppBar, and that's going to be an object. And in here, I'm going to set the background to red. Now we can't do this because we're no longer writing proper CSS, we're writing in JavaScript. So you're going to have to add it inside quotation marks. So I'm going to say AppBar background red. And we can't put a colon because this is considered an object. So we have to separate the next style. And in here we would say color pink, for example. So remember, we're no longer writing proper CSS. We are actually writing CSS in JavaScript, which means we have to write everything in terms of JavaScript. So you write in a function, pass it in an object with a lot of properties, and each property has its own object. Styles are separated using comma, and any CSS property that has multiple words, they have to be camel cased. So I cannot say, for example, here I cannot say margin right equals 5 pixels. I cannot do that. The way you do it is like that, margin top, and you can see your auto completion as well. It's helpful to look at. So margin top, and you can't do 5 pixels. You can't keep it as 5, and by default Material UI will understand that this is 5 pixels. If you want it to be exact and tell Material UI whether you wanted pixels, rem or m or whatever, you can't say 5 rem. You have to say 5 rem, so inside a quotation mark, just like everything else. For in here, I'm going to say, for example, 10 pixels. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to export here. I'm going to export the use styles. Use styles. So export default, use styles, and use styles is a function now. So make styles receives an object and returns a function to us. So now I'm going to import the use styles that I just created, and it was a default export, so I'm going to import it like this, use styles from styles. And the way to use it, I'm going to get rid of this, and inside our component I'm going to create a variable, call it classes, and in here I'm going to call the use styles and invoke that function, and the return is the object with all the classes. So now I go to my AppBar and I do class name, but instead of doing quotation marks, now I want to place a JavaScript class, and therefore I would say classes.appbar. And I'm going to save this and go back to my React project or to the browser, and I'm going to refresh the page, and as you can see now there is some changes. So we go back to the styles. You can see that we've set the background to red, the color to pink, and the margin to 10 pixels, which is as we expected. And I could refresh that and it still contains the same styling. So this is one of the right ways to style your components. And it's very interesting how it works, and very interesting how it can be used. So let's change this back to black and save it. It refreshed. I'm going to get rid of the margin top, set it back to 0. By default it's 0, but I could say maybe 2. And maybe I'll get rid of this. Let's do border. So we'll do border, 1 pix, solid, maybe pink. That looks better. And we have our tabs. So let's, for example, target the text or the header here. So we could do the same thing. We could do class name equals, we'll say classes.devScript. Just call it the way it is, and I'll make the changes now in the styles.js. So in here I'll create a devScript class, and I'm going to change, for example, let's see, I'm going to change the background to be white. Oops. Okay, as you can see I made a mistake, so it's very easy to make these type of mistakes. I like the white color on it, but it's taking the whole length. Since it's a header, it's a block element as I mentioned earlier, so I need to do some changes here. I want to set the width of it to maybe 60%. If I was to do just that, it automatically knows whether it's pixels. So you could just do this instead of adding pixels. We can see that's a bit too small, so I'm going to set it to 100. And it's still too small. Maybe I'll go 150. 200 maybe. Okay, that's better. 200. I'm not going to mess around with the actual height. I'm going to keep it the same way. But you get the idea of how we're styling this. So now we're going to style the toolbar. So I'm going to add a class here. I'm going to do classes or class name. And I'm going to say classes.toolbar. And in here, I'm going to add a new class, call it toolbar. And say I want to set a background to it for now so we can see it. Background white. It's going to fail because it's not a string. So as you can see now, we have the app bar. This looks nice, like cool design. And we have our button here. I'm getting an idea now actually. I could take the button and place it here. And then you have our tabs. This is actually interesting. I think I'm going to keep it like this. So we could directly change where this button is through the toolbar, or we could set a class on it as well. Using class names like the way we've been doing here is interesting and it's straightforward. But it gets hard when you try to target child elements or child components. So to target the icon button should be straightforward, but sometimes the deeper you go, the harder it gets. It's not as easy as normal CSS. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to target the button and going to try and move it to the right here. So how do we do that? Well, if I look at the component right here, we know it's a button element and it has few classes. So I could select it directly using its tag. So I could do something like, okay, so it's inside the toolbar. We can't do button, we can't do this. And the only way to do it is to go like string, button, and then targeted. And then I could do something like margin left, for example. Can't do that either. Remember, it's JS, CSS and JS. So margin left will do. Can't do that. Has to be a string. Let's see if this has been applied now. And as you can see, it didn't get applied yet. CSS in JavaScript, we would have to use strings again. So I would use the parent. I'm going to put space. And in here, I'm going to target the button. And I could say something like background color red. And as you can see now, I've targeted the actual button. You could do something like that, so it's the first parent or the first button directly after the parent. So what this says is this and represents the parent. So it's almost like saying toolbar slash or greatest sign button, or even just like that. So select the button inside the toolbar. Well, I'm going to keep it like this, and I'm going to do something like maybe change the color. So I'm going to say color. You can put hexadecimal. I'll mix it up so you get the idea. And I'm going to change the color of this icon to maybe gray. And so we're going to move the the notification icon or button to the right side. And to do that, it's we're going to set the margin right or the margin left of the button to be auto. So push it as much as you want. If we save, we can look that we have our icon here, and it's disappearing because it needs some further styling. And to do that, if I wanted to target it directly from here, so I could go a bit further and go like, do something like inside the actual button styling, I'm going to have another and symbol, and in here I would say and hover to represent the hover effect of the button. So now we're no longer dealing with the toolbar, but we used it in order to get to the button, and the and sign here represent the actual button now. So we're saying button hover, and when we hover, what do we want to do? We want to set the background maybe to purple. As you can see now, everything looks perfect. Maybe we can modify the actual the tabs. So I'm going to go here actually to the tabs component, and inside the tabs component I'm going to have a class name, and I'm going to say this class name will be tabs or classes.tabs. And I'm going to go back to the tabs component, and in here I'm going to say tabs, and I'm going to change the background color. I believe we can do this. I can't remember if yes we can. I was just saying we can do this, right? Dodger blue is his favorite color. Perfect. But it doesn't fit this very well. Let's go with something. Come on. That's perfect actually. Let's leave it as that. So this sets the background color of the whole tabs component. If we wanted to then modify individual tabs, we could always inspect the elements and see what kind of styling they have. So it has MUI tab root, MUI button base root, and it has a bunch of styling. And we could select individual tabs using the anchor element. So I could do something like we did earlier, and anchor, and that will select all the actual tabs for us. Or I could come here and give it the same class name. So I could give all these the same class name, or I could just say something like here, I could say class name tab, and all the tabs will have the same class name. Or I could pass different class names here if I wanted all of them to be different. So I'm going to keep it like that. So now we could style these tabs. So we could say that we want the background or the color of these anchor tags to be white. And I don't think that works for some reason. Oh yeah, okay. So it did work. Okay, maybe we could change it to something different. Maybe we could set it to black. Okay, so it is working. And we could set the width, we could set the height, we could do all kinds of stuff here. So we could say minimum, or maybe just the width property. Let's say width is going to be equal 100. We don't need to put in the pixels. And we can save that and inspect to see. And as you can see, it didn't take any effect. The question is why? And the answer is to go back to the tab components and try to understand what what gets used to set the width and the height. So icon, barbed, value, label, icon, and classes, children. So in here, we read through the CSS classes. So we can see that the full width style applies to the root element if full width is true, and nothing is helpful here. So then I go back to the actual browser to see how the width is applied. We can see that they all have the same width, 160. So I'm going to look down and I see that MUI tab root is 160 pixels. So in here, having the width property does not affect the width of the actual tabs. So I need to change the actual MUI tab root, or I need to set min width here to, let's say, 200. And as you can see now, all of our tabs, they have 200 width. So as we can see here, the component injected our styles on top of the rest of the styling. A better approach is to actually modify these classes directly. And to do this, I'm going to change or modify the MUI tab root. Now I can't just say here MUI tab root because it doesn't work like that. Instead, we look at what component we were using. So we were using the tab component. So I'm going to go to the tab component, and in here, like I said earlier, it gives us the props, but it also gives us the CSS styles that gets applied. And so I'm going to look for the class that I'm looking to modify. So MUI tab root. Going to go back. I'm going to look for MUI tab root. And as you can see, it's the first one. And it gives me this thing called root or rule name. And what this does, we can use this now to actually modify the root. So how would you use this? So to use this, I would create a new class, and I'm going to call it tab root. And in here, I'm going to set the width, or the minimum width, to 200. I'm going to save it, copy it. I'm going to go back, and we're going to use one of our tabs maybe here, and we're going to say, if you look here, actually, there is a classes prop, and this classes prop is used to override the classes. And so I'm going to call the classes prop, and it takes in an object. I'm going to say classes dot, and what did we call this tab root? Classes dot tab root. And I'm going to get rid of this one because we're no longer using it. And as we can see now, if we go back to the code, it is crashing. And why is it crashing? Because we said classes instead of class name or class. Actually, that's no, that's right. Unexpected token 34. Unexpected token. Why is it doing that? Let's see. Let's go back to the tab, make sure we didn't mess up anything. Oh yeah. So we need to set the actual rule name. Remember we said there's a rule name? So we have defined the class, but we didn't define which rule we want to override. So we have to give it root, and since it's an object, you have to do it the object way. So colon, and then the value. So key value. I'm going to save this. Oopsie, what's going on now? Okay, seems to be working now. So as you can see now, it had changed the width of our tab to be 200, just like we set it. And that's pretty much it, guys. The other way to style it, I mean, there's different ways you can really use and go through. I'd suggest you go through all the different stylings, but using the hook API to do the styling is very good. It's a very good way of starting, and also it's a very good approach to begin with and style all your components like that. But I'd be careful because there is something to do with the import. So when you import in it and you try to use it on the different, if you're trying to import it into different components, sometimes it will cause some issues, like it wouldn't work. So what people do in general, they would have it on top of their component and then they could use it. So each component will have its own make styles API call. The other way of doing this is instead of just passing in an object, you'd pass in a function. So in here, I'm going to create a function with one parameter, and it's going to return an object. Actually, let's see, let's do it this way. Let's say return this, and in here I want to print out what theme is. And if you go to the console, you can see now I have access to all the good things that comes from the theme. So I could do things like dynamically or conditionally apply styling. But in here, it tells us the typography that comes with this theme, the spacing, the shape, the shadows, the props, the palette, so the colors and all that, and the mixins. And if I was to use the theme just in a simple example, let's do, for example, spacing on the dev script tag or text. So in here I would do something like margin. We'll do margin right, and I would use the spacing of the theme. So I would do theme. It's an object, so we don't want the breakpoints, and we don't want the mixins. So then we come to spacing. So I could do something like theme.spacing, and it's a function. So in here you pass it in an integer to specify how many spaces you wanted. So if you say 1, by default Material UI spacing is either in 7 or 8, so 8 pixels I believe, or 7. I might be wrong, but let's just try C with 1. So 1 is not going to be 1 pixel. Margin right. Okay, so let's see. So as you can see, 8. I could do some certain things as well. For example, I could say, I could use the breakpoint. So I could do something like this. To use the breakpoint, this is what you do. Theme.breakpoints. So it has these different functions. And I suggest you read about that as well if you want to advance your Material UI game. But if I want to do certain thing only when the breakpoint is at that particular point. But I want to do something when the breakpoint is at a number or below that number. So I'm going to say down, and it's a function. And in here, as you can see in the suggestions, it says extra small, small, medium, large, or extra large. So I'm going to tell it to do something when it's small or below small. And to do that, we pass in a string and we say small. And in here, I want to do something. For example, I want to display none. So I want to hide this when it's small or small none. So 959 is what small is. And the fact that I said it's down, so I want you to, from small, including the end of small, so near the medium, and below that, I want you to hide the text. So this is how breakpoints are done. So typically you'd go to every tag and you would basically go through it and add in breakpoints and things like that. But in the next video, I'll go into more details about these things, and we'll tackle things one by one. So we'll tackle spacing, breakpoints, and we'll get you to learn about Material UI much better. So I hope to see you in the next video, guys.